do about 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes. We'll take 2 minutes. The live stream audience, we want it to be at,
That's right. Okay.
at 7 o'clock. So.
Good evening. Hello. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Higher? Right up here. Okay. Thank you all for coming out tonight to the Tippy McMichael lecture. It's wonderful to see such a huge crowd here, so many smiling faces. Evan already thanked the St. Spatulas Guild, but I have to say again that they do such an incredible job. So thanks to everyone who brought, other people who brought food as well. Thank you to the Tippy McMichael Committee. Thank you to the remember, to the staff and the clergy at St. Paul's. And I don't want to forget the people who helped set up the room and the people who are in the kitchen now washing the dishes and cleaning up. And after we're all done and we go home, they're going to come back and they're going to take down all the chairs and tables. So their efforts are greatly appreciated. So the lecture series tonight is named after Clifton Reed McMichael, who was affectionately known as Tippy. She was a lifelong member of St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and despite having to rely on crutches or a wheelchair when she was an adult because she acquired polio as a child, she had a very professional career as an adult, and she worked during World War II at Fort Chaffee, and she later worked as an executive at U.S. Steel in St. Louis. Upon her death, Tippy left a portion of her estate as a bequest to enhance the life and the work of the church. The Tippy McMichael Lecture Series was created from her gift as an expression of thanksgiving and as a memorial to her life and legacy. The series is funded through the St. Paul's Permanent Endowment Fund, with additional support coming from generous donations from parishioners and friends of St. Paul's. These lectures are offered to the wider community from which St. Paul's draws its life. They are intended to explore a wide range of spiritual issues and to feature accomplished speakers from various disciplined and diverse religious traditions. If anyone here feels moved to contribute to the Tippy McMichael Lecture Series, you can see any one of us afterwards or at another time. We appreciate any donations. So tonight we are extremely grateful to have Bishop Mariann Edgar Budde here as our guest, and she's going to talk to us about how we can be brave on having moral courage during turbulent times. So now I'm going to turn this over to Evan, our rector, and he's going to introduce Mariann.
Thank you, Denise. Denise's hard work and the hard work of the committee is why we are able to gather for such a special event. And I sense that our hearts are open and full of hope as we gather tonight. What a wonderful thing for us to be able to do together. Thank you for being here. It's an honor and privilege to introduce to you Bishop Mariann Edgar Budde. And a couple of people have asked, so what's her job? Because we, I think, primarily receive or engage Bishop Budde from afar, from her voice in really important moments in the life of our country, especially in the last few years. But that does not tell the story of her ministry, her life, her work, her devotion and passion as the chief pastor, the bishop, the spiritual leader of the 86 congregations and additional Episcopal schools in the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, which includes not only the district, but 4 counties in Maryland, which itself is a huge job. And for Bishop Budde to take time to be with us, not to mention all of the other places, is a real gift for us. But I want to share with you a couple of reflections that I heard this week from some priests in her diocese that I think helps me at least, and maybe you as well, appreciate why Bishop Budde is so important for us, for the church, and for the wider world. She is always prayerful and grounded. She is kind in her personal relationships and courageous in her public witness. She's really funny and doesn't take herself too seriously. Another colleague noted that after a busy week, there was an additional event in the life of his congregation, a retirement, that required a pretty significant drive outside of the city. And to his surprise, Bishop Budde was there, not because she had a speaking role, but because these were her people and she was caring for them as a pastor, as a bishop, someone who was present with them. I am so thankful that Bishop Budde offers that witness, not only when the cameras are on, but in those deep, personal, and important pastoral relationships and the quiet witness that we might not ever see, but that is absolutely real and vital for the church, not only in Washington, but for the whole Episcopal Church and even people of faith and goodwill in our country. Would you join me in welcoming Bishop Budde?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Those of you in the back? Great. I feel like I should have a joke to tell you now. And I don't, but maybe I'll come up with one as we go forward. But first of all, thank you for inviting me to be with you this weekend, for your welcome, your hospitality, and all that I have learned about Tippy McMichael makes me wish to have known her. And I'm honored to take part in a wonderful lecture series in her honor. And if there's one message to take away from my time with you tonight, it's this: that courage, while an innate characteristic, something that God has given us, it's also something that we learn throughout life. And we learn courage, we learn to be brave from one another, we learn from life's circumstances, and speaking spiritually now, we learn from the particular ways that God calls each one of us to do something that, left to our own strength, would be impossible. And I'm persuaded that that sense of call, that sense of summons that we sometimes feel rising up within us, or that is required of us in a given circumstance, I believe it's universal, and it is the most transformative spiritual experience known to humankind. You don't have to be religious to experience it. It's a human phenomenon. And it moves us to make conscious decisions, choosing one path over another, stepping across a threshold, or coming to terms with the reality that we cannot change. And while sometimes we may feel excited and prepared for what's being asked of us, for most of us, most of the time, we feel woefully unprepared for those moments. Because what we're being asked to do is impossible. And that's precisely when and how we learn to be brave. By doing, as Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, the very thing we think we cannot do. We learn to be brave through practice. We learn by tapping into the great spiritual reservoirs of humanity. For those of us who strive to be followers of Jesus, we learn to be brave by studying his teachings, his life, gathering around his table, trusting his guiding hand. Learning to be brave is also humbling. At least it is for me, in that it involves acknowledging mistakes, missteps, taking responsibility for things I've said or done that have been hurtful to others. But that's part of what makes the learning process real, and why it's so helpful to learn from the examples of other people, not the shiny examples, the human ones, the real ones of struggle and imperfection, because through their stories, we are given grace to embrace our own. So recently, I've been reading the memoir of the Reverend James Lawson, Jr. And while he's not as well known as Martin Luther King, Jr. or John Lewis, Lawson was a formidable spiritual and tactical leader of the nonviolence movement that fueled the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s. And he continued. He lived to the age of 95, and he continued in that work through it to the end. And the title of his memoir is Nonviolence. And with the opening sentence of his book, he tells of an event of his childhood that shaped the man he would become. He writes, "I smacked a white boy in the face when I was 4 years old." So maybe that's my joke. Isn't that a great opening line for a memoir on nonviolence? Had me hooked. The other boy, about the same age, and whom Lawson considered a friend, called him a racial epithet that was forbidden in Lawson's house. And he remembers feeling shocked and betrayed. He was rejecting me, Lawson writes. And somewhere within my little boy self, I realized he was seeing me as not fully human because I was black. So Lawson hit him as hard as he could. And the other boy hit him back. And that was that. He never told his parents what happened, sensing that his mother would disapprove. But the memory never left him. And later in life, Lawson came to understand what happened to him that day as actually a call from God. And this is what he writes. He says, "As that boy began his tie ride, I felt a force rising up from deep inside, stronger than the mean message in his words. It was an inkling or an impulse, a spur, urging me to challenge the heat he was spewing. I couldn't resist it. If I could go back to my 4-year-old self and explain that mysterious, astonishing, empowering force within me that day, I would tell my younger self that it was God's love, and I would assure him that it would always be there for him from that day forward, reminding him that no one has the right to deny, question, or assault the fact of his humanity, his character, his essence." And there would be more fights as he grew, each one giving him an assurance of his dignity and that it was worth defending with his fists. But one day when Lawson was in the 4th grade now, he got into yet another fight with another boy who taunted him with racial slurs. And for some reason, this time when he came home, he told his mother about what happened. And he remembers her standing at the kitchen sink, turned away from him, washing dishes. And she didn't turn back to face him. She simply said softly, "Jimmy, what good did that do?" And he was stunned into silence by her words. And apparently she continued talking, reminding him that they were Christians, that they always sought to do God's will, that they were people of love. I don't know how long her soliloquy was, he writes, but I know she finished it with this sentence: "Jimmy, there must be a better way." That's when Lawson heard another voice, again resounding deep within, once again seeming to be the voice of God, saying to him, "You will never fight in this way again. You will find a better way." And those two events in his early childhood marked the beginning of a lifelong commitment to end racial injustice and violence without resorting to violence himself. He never fought with his classmates again, and he went on to become one of the great practitioners of nonviolence that we have ever known. So as I've told you this small portion of his story, I wonder if there's any aspect of it that resonates with yours. For me, there are at least two. First, I know what it's like to learn a lesson in courage through a transgression, something that I'd done in my past that I now regret and that I will never do again. Now, at 4 years old, Lawson could hardly be expected to have the moral capacity to weigh his options when his friend attacked him. Nonetheless, looking back, he knows now that he won't ever go there again. I've done things in my life that I now regret, and even if I can justify them or wrap arms of compassion around the little girl or the older girl or the young woman that I was at the time, there's a part of me now that knows I'm not going to go there again, you know? But second, and more importantly, I loved the way he described the experience of God in those moments, coming to him as a summons, as a claim on his life, and that he would remember for his entire life. And in particular, and this is important, how he felt in those moments. Because that feeling would come back to him time and again. And it would be a marker for him to pay attention that God was hovering near. And in similar ways, though not nearly as dramatic or consequential, there was a marking event in my adolescence in which I felt something similar, of a clarity that I felt inside me, but it wasn't from me, rising up within me, that at age 17 I dared to believe was the voice of God. And whenever that feeling comes back, and it doesn't happen very often, I know to pay attention, and as best I can to follow where it's guiding me, even when the path is costly, which it almost always is. Which brings me to the topic of moral courage. Now, simply defined, moral courage is the willingness to speak up or to take action for something that you inside yourself deeply believe to be right. And you're willing to do so even in the face of fear or opposition or personal risk. You're willing to face the consequences, personal consequences such as criticism or rejection or the loss of stature. It's not the same as physical courage. That's about facing physical danger. Moral courage is about facing social or emotional risks in order to uphold core, non-negotiable values that you've discovered within yourself. So for moral courage, we need a North Star. The actual North Star, as you know, is a fixed point in the night sky that our forebears relied on for navigation because it was the one thing that was steady for them, marking true north. And its constancy was what made it a vital tool for guidance. Metaphorically, then, our North Star is whatever it is that guides us when we don't know what's ahead. It symbolizes whatever it is that gives us a sense of direction or purpose. It's what we hold on to, especially when we're feeling disoriented or overwhelmed. And it grounds us in certain truths that we hold on to, no matter what. So a North Star isn't something that you just trip over, you know? It's a hard-won, core understanding that you come to over time. And it's an important thing to ponder in your life. What is it? What's your North Star? Or what are the truths that you hold on to when those winds of turbulence blow? Something I've had to give a lot of thought to in the past year. I've often found myself coming back to something that Jesus said to the Pharisee Nicodemus in that scene where Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night. And after they have that whole exchange about being born again, Jesus says this, in the plural, he says, "We speak of what we know." We speak of what we know, and we testify to what we have seen. That's what I did my best to articulate at the inaugural prayer service a year ago. I wasn't speaking for me. I was speaking for us. I was speaking as best I could of what we know, testifying to what we have seen. And the fact that so basic a sermon, no different, I suspect, from what you would expect to hear from the pulpit here at St. Paul's on a given Sunday, or wherever else you might worship. The fact that it caused such anger and even rage among some and was such an affirmation and source of hope for others, it says a lot more about where we are as a people than it does about me, right? It's about us. And so what that response has done for me, including the many of you who were kind enough to come up to greet me personally this evening, what it's done for me is it's evoked in me a sense of responsibility to steward, along with all of you, a religious worldview that seeks to promote the highest of human aspirations. What Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. And it gives me hope that we have a vital contribution to make to what needs to be a compelling and comprehensive alternative to the ascendancy of Christian nationalism. And that we're called to do our part to, and I'll just say it, to stop those who are determined to dismantle the institutions and the guardrails of all that we hold dear. Yes. And to accelerate the very trends we need to reverse for the human species to survive. And so in our tumultuous time, I believe that our greatest contributions, for those of you like me who identify as Christian, our responsibility is to testify to what we know, and to speak of what we know, to testify of what we have seen, and even more important, to live as best we can, according to the highest aspirations of humankind revealed to us in Jesus, recognizing the inherent God-given dignity of every human being, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and even, Lord, help us to love our enemies. I'll say more about that in a moment. That's important. To share what we have and strive for an equitable and just society. To refrain from evil and refuse to hate. To be mindful of the power of our words. And to speak without malice or contempt. To forgive as we have been forgiven. To live in hope. And if need be willing to sacrifice even our very lives for the sake of love. This is our calling as Christians, one that we could never fulfill on our own power, but through the love and mercy of Christ that lives in us. Now, in our efforts to do all of this, we find ourselves in common cause with some Christians and in opposition to others. I think it's important to remember that this is nothing new. Christians have been disagreeing publicly on mercy and other things since the Council of Jerusalem, which is recorded in the book of Acts, right? It's just part of, we are represented across the spectrum of every human expression, right? And what President Lincoln said of Christians fighting against one another in the Civil War is as true for Christians today on opposite sides of whatever public debate. Both read the same Bible, both pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. Which raises important questions for us, friends, on how we disagree with other Christians publicly and over what issues. Now, I must say, I never anticipated being at odds with other Christians about the primacy of mercy. And as far as I can tell, because I've thought about this a lot, it's not that some of us think mercy is a good thing and others think it's bad, right? But there's real disagreement about when, how, and by whom, and for whom mercy should be given. And the question of mercy has resurfaced in 2026 with the rapid escalation of a policy of immigration detention and deportation that's invoking terror in immigrant communities across the country, and especially what we've seen in Minnesota, where 3,000 ICE and Immigration Border Patrol agents have been deployed since early January. Some of the strongest supporters of those policies are Christians, though that may be waning some. And I confess, it's hard to listen to Christians in support of what's happening, right? Yet I have to tell you that one of the moral commitments I have made in this turbulent time, in the past year, is to lean on the promises we've made as Christians at our baptism, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, and to respect the dignity of every human being. And so, to the best of my ability, which is not perfect, I will assume the best in all persons and listen to those whose life experiences have led them to dramatically different conclusions. I've also learned over the years, the many years of ministry, that very few people I disagree with ever change their minds because of my persuasive argument. Have you noticed that? No matter how reasonable or biblically grounded it seems to me. How are we changed? How are you changed? We're changed through relationships. We learn love by being loved. We learn forgiveness by being forgiven. We learn mercy when we receive mercy. And Jesus calls us into relationship with the most vulnerable and on the receiving end of dehumanizing speech in our country. He calls us into relationship with those whose life experiences we do not share. He calls us into relationship with those with whom we disagree. And with that in mind, and I'm kind of wrapping things up here, I'd like to share with you two recent experiences. So 2 weeks ago, I traveled to Minneapolis. I was one of 700 clergy persons from around the country who answered the call to stand in solidarity with our counterparts in Minnesota. And I'm sure you've seen the videos and news reports of what life is like there. Now, you need to know, I have strong family and vocational ties in Minnesota. I served a Minneapolis congregation for 18 years before I came to Washington. My husband and I raised our sons there. One of our sons lives there now and is raising his family. I have colleagues, close friends, and so I've been on the receiving end of texts, emails, and phone messages for the last 6 weeks, all variations of whatever you are hearing and seeing from where you are, it cannot convey the level of fear and chaos that we are experiencing. And when I got there, the personal stories of how people have been treated by agents of the federal government are as horrific as those who have made the headlines, and they're far more widespread. What is less reported and understood, however, and my counterpart there, the Episcopal Bishop of Minnesota, would tell you if he were here, what's less reported are the thousands and thousands of expressions of neighborly love through which Minnesotans are taking care of one another. It is one of the most moving things I have ever seen, the mass mobilization of love. And I returned to Washington the morning Alex Preddy was shot. And of course, his death was a travesty, followed by a disastrous attempt to convince Americans not to trust what they could see for themselves, which seems to have made a difference, shifting the tone and momentum of ICE, although yet not quite enough for those who live there. I'm telling you all of this because it's been heart-wrenching to watch from a distance, as I can tell it has been for all of you. But I need to tell you, this is not an abstraction for me. These are people that I know and I love personally, who are in legitimate fear of the federal government. And that just changes how it feels, right? And the hardest people for me to respond to now are not those who actually support the administration's stated goal of deporting 3,000 people a day. Rather, it is the Christians who matter-of-factly speak to me of the need for safe borders, of how unfortunate it was that the previous administration allowed untold millions of people into our country, that the collateral damage of the current policy is indeed unfortunate, but, people should know better than to resist arrest or to interfere with enforcement officers doing their jobs. It is chilling to be on the receiving end of that. Because from my perspective, what's happening in Minnesota isn't about securing our border or addressing an immigration policy that has been in need of reform for decades. It's a campaign of cruelty designed to invoke fear, carried out by officers under pressure to make a quota of arrests and have been assured of complete immunity for their actions. So it's really hard to know. I'm just saying this. It's hard to know how to respond to those speaking from this safe distance who either do not know or don't seem to care about what's happening in plain sight and from what we're learning, even worse, behind closed doors of detention centers across this country. Now, these people I'm describing, they're not bad people. They aren't even necessarily wrong in some of their assessments. And yet listening to them is absolutely devastating. And it makes me wonder, because people come to me all the time with stories of suffering. And it makes me wonder when I have spoken like that to people I don't know and whose situations I don't fully understand, and from which I need to keep a distance, right? When do I do that? When do I speak with such ignorance and sufficient distance as actually to be cruel? And I'm learning that proximity doesn't guarantee mercy, but distance and ignorance works against it. And that's something that's giving me a lot of pause right now, because we're all in some relationship to that, given all the suffering in the world. Okay. So that's the first story. The second one, and I'll bring this home now. So last Saturday, we had our diocesan convention. And in the afternoon, we debated a resolution entitled, in all capital letters, if you could see it, Dignity, Not Hate. Not mass deportation. No, not mass deportation, not silence. So I'll say it again. Dignity, not hate, not mass deportation, not silence. It was a very strong call for our congregations to take up the cause of migrants in our communities with a long list of prescribed actions for our congregations to take. As you can probably imagine, it was a resolution crafted in passion and mercy for the most vulnerable among us. Now, knowing the diocese as I do, I had no doubt that the resolution would pass. Nonetheless, those who came to the microphone to support it spoke as if they were at an outdoor rally, tasked with whipping us up as a crowd. Or perhaps they were on the debate floor with hostile adversaries on the other side, right? No one dared speak against the resolution, and I wasn't surprised. But it's not that because everyone was in agreement. I know and love a lot of people in the diocese who hold a different view than the one being espoused, and I was certain that there were a bunch of them on the convention floor. And there was even more, I was convinced, like me, sympathetic to the resolution, but nonetheless uneasy with its strident tone, the blanket statements made, and the sense of moral superiority in the room. I was uncomfortable, and I was the chair, so I couldn't, but I was uncomfortable. Why? Because there was absolutely no mercy for those who held a different view, or who were uncertain, or who didn't know. We failed to show mercy as we argued for mercy that migrants rightfully deserve, which is a painful lesson that I take with me. Do you hear the nuance of this? The common humanity that we're... So as I draw this out, and I really would love some time for questions, I just want to return to the questions at the heart of everything I've said so far. The questions like what it means to be brave, what it means to have moral courage now. And it's rarely heroic in the ways we imagine. More often it's this steady, relational, sustained commitment over time in the vineyards that we've been called to tend to. And moral courage is guided by a North Star that helps us navigate. And for those of us who follow Jesus, that North Star is his love. Love that absolutely refuses to dehumanize, that draws near rather than turns away, and that seeks a better way, even when the cost is real. It's the way of love. And we can learn to be brave. We can be brave because none of us is asked to carry this alone. We are strengthened by one another. We are informed by grace and sustained by a God who meets us in the storm. And step by step, with mercy for one another and everyone else, we can learn how to be brave. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Budde.
Welcome.
We do have time for some questions, but let me give you one helpful instruction before we turn the microphone over to anyone. Please try to focus on a question and not a speech. I sense that a lot of us, we want to share what's on our heart, and I hope that tonight inspires you to look for opportunities to share what's on your heart. And this church and other organizations are committed to amplifying our voices in this moment. Let's focus on questions so that we can hear more from Bishop Budde. Who has a question for Bishop Budde?
Bishop, thank you so much for coming to Northwest Arkansas. I, like many Americans and global citizens, appreciate your inaugural address. Can you tell us about that preparation, your angst before, your thought process? And you did an excellent job. Thank you.
I was tasked with offering a homily in a service that was planned and announced before we knew the outcome of the election. The dean of the cathedral made it clear that the service would be the same regardless of who won, that it would be a prayer service for unity and healing after a bruising political campaign. So I knew what my assignment was before I knew the outcome of the election. When I knew the outcome of the election, I knew what my assignment was. And so I thought about it a lot, and I consulted with a lot of people, and I reflected on it. It was a big deal. And I wanted to think, so where I wound up, sort of honing in was, those of you who are biblical scholars or read your Bibles, and certainly those of you who are preacher, you know that God doesn't take kindly on human beings when we pray for things that we have no intention of working toward ourselves, right? It just doesn't land well with God. So I felt some pastoral responsibility to say, it's all well and good to pray for unity, but we have to acknowledge as a people that we're pretty committed to working against it, especially in our political life. And that if we wanted some kind of unity that was not based on conformity or apathy or coercion, but that actually acknowledged the full dignity and diversity of our nation, that we had to uphold to some basic principles. And one was the honoring the dignity of every human being. One was honesty in private and public speech. Big one. One was humility. And I meant by that recognizing that we all make mistakes. The political arena is very unforgiving for anyone who makes a misstep or a mistake, and that's unfortunate. And then also, finally, that when we are in positions of power over others, to have mercy. The day before the prayer service, I watched the actual inauguration itself, and I realized then that President Trump, unlike his first term, was not entering in his second term with any intention to create a unity by building bridges with those who disagreed with him. That he was actually doubling down on the we versus them. And those who were being dehumanized by him were categories of people I knew and loved, and who were I felt were especially vulnerable and were invisible in his world. And that's when I decided to bring as much humanity into the room as I could, and that's how that came to be. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Bishop Budde. In the book, you write about how folks in D.C. are working for reparations, and folks in Fayetteville are doing that too.
I know.
So what could we learn from you, or what would you say to us?
Oh, well, I'm sure you're doing your good work. I have to say that the more we learn about the people in our past and what their experiences were, the more the work of reparations takes on real clarity and a kind of compelling nature. And some of it, I'll just tell you one story that came up recently. There's our diocese, I don't know what it's like in Fayetteville, but our diocese goes all the way, and in some parts goes all the way back to the colonial era. We have land grant congregations, tobacco-based congregations that in the southern part of Maryland have congregations that were built pre-Confederate, pre-Civil War on sort of both sides of the war in Maryland. We have, D.C. was a hotbed of division during the war. Our churches kind of lined up in that way. And the black congregation, it was both free and enslaved. But there's a church in southern Maryland, in the town of Waldorf, and after the Civil War, apparently, black Episcopalians were basically zoned into certain areas and were assigned to different churches. And they were assigned, and they were very clearly in this, and this is a woman who's 84 years old, so this is like in the 40s and 50s. It was very clear that as a young girl, she was not welcome in the same way that the white young girls were. And in fact, there was still sort of the separation, sitting in different parts of the church. She was going through confirmation class as a young girl, and she couldn't participate in the class. And someone came to her house and gave her a bit of instruction that she'd never seen in her life. And she went through this whole thing as a teenager, and it never sat well with her. And at age 82 or 3, she said to her rector, I want to reaffirm my vows because it never felt real. And then she told her story, right? And then she reaffirmed her vows in the context of a loving, embracing community. And she was the one, at 82, she led the procession in of the confirmation class, right? She was right there. But just that sense of healing for her, like her story could be held and contained, and we could grieve the way that she had been treated, and she could experience some kind of wholeness, and we could own. I had no idea that was true in the 40s and 50s, but that was a part of our story. So I would just say that stories like that help us understand the spiritual and relational side of reparations. And then the financial piece, we're trying to sort out, like where do we invest resources that we have that have been have accumulated over time and that are in any real way connected to the racial divisions in our area. How might we go about being instruments of some manner of healing? So however that's working out for you here, I commend it to you. It's courageous work. When we started it, it was there was a lot of social momentum for it, and all that momentum is now gone. And so we're doing it as churches, I think, in an environment where the rest of the society has been given a pass to let it go, and which makes it all the more important. So thank you.
Question right here.
Before you talked to before you spoke up to our president, were you nervous?
Yeah. I was very nervous. Some of you will appreciate this. It was a long service, right? There were a lot of different prayers and stuff, and I was sitting on the platform, and they were all sitting over there, and there's this whole group of people. And I'm sitting on the platform, I'm praying, right? And I'm saying, Lord, I really don't want to throw up right now. Right? But, and some of you know this too, if any of you are part of 12-step spirituality programs, you know there's a certain prayer that people are encouraged to pray in 12-step spirituality, which is basically when you're feeling something and it's a struggle for you, you ask God to take that feeling and to replace it with something that would be pleasing to God. So I'm up there saying, okay, Lord, I really want to throw up right now, and what I'd really like you to do is to take that from me and allow me to do this work. And the interesting thing is, and I don't know if you do sports or anything, but once I got up into the pulpit, I was fine, because it's sort of like muscle memory. Like I've been preaching for almost 40 years. It's like, okay, I can do this. But it was like climbing up the pulpit. So yeah.
Other questions? Raise your hand. Denise, you got somebody? Great.
Yep, right there. There's a microphone coming your way. I'd love to know your names as well.
My name is Mark Baber.
Hi, Mark.
And I can't find mercy in my heart for him. Can you help me?
Yeah, I think I can. I think that all the spiritual leaders that I've had in my life that have helped me with forgiveness when I can't forgive, or mercy when I can't provide mercy, is to simply acknowledge that before God and trust that God has sufficient mercy. That is not, and that just to entrust, I'm assuming you're talking about our president, but just entrust him to I don't know who the him is, if it's your, brother or something. But I would say it's really important for us to pray for him and to entrust him into the mercy of God. I don't know what else to say, because otherwise we just are sending more of that agitation into the turbulence that is our life. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that I'm good at it. We have a couple of rules in our house, and one of them is we have banished the word hate from our house because we were just throwing it around a little bit too easily. We hated this, we hated that. It's like, okay, can we just save hate? You know, just like, and when we find ourselves talking really fast about what's happening in the country, that's when we decide to change the subject because it's not helpful. I guess those are the things I would say. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the honesty of that.
Who else has a question? Thanks. Denise, and then I'll get you next.
Hi there. My name is Kalela. This whole evening we've been speaking about courage. It makes me think about the 4 cardinal virtues of justice, temperance, prudence, and then courage, sometimes translated as fortitude. Can you give us a little bit more detail about how courage works in collaboration with and is strengthened by the other 3 virtues?
Remind me what they are.
Justice, temperance, prudence, and courage.
Yeah. Well, I think the 2 that I would focus on are temperance and prudence because you could see how courage would be in the service or easily in the service of justice, right? That it requires courage to seek justice in environments where justice is denied. But temperance and prudence, those are virtues of self-regulation, right? And that's kind of going back to what we were talking about. Self-regulation is actually a really important life practice for maturity, which is not the same as denying what you're feeling. It's not what it is, but it's having the wherewithal to determine how much you are going to inflict how you're feeling on other people and how you are able to recognize the impact of your presence in whatever room you're in. Or to put it another way, we are not distant observers of the culture that we are critiquing. We're a part of it. We contribute to it. We, in some ways, benefit from it. So what are the ways that our temperance or our prudence are ways that we can have courage, but not necessarily walk around with a courageous chip on our shoulders that makes us unbearable to be around, right? It's one way. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, since I suspect you've been thinking about those 4 a lot. So thank you.
Okay, wonderful talk. My name's Brenda Gullett.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. For those of us who have walked with Christ for many years and know what a beneficial, wonderful experience it is, we see all of this unbelievable scourge of Christian nationalism. We see how the organized church has failed many people, and yet we look out and see people every day that we would love to give an olive branch to say, just give it a thought, come join us. What is your best advice for a segue into the heart of someone that has been so damaged by looking at these things that we see every day related to the church?
It's a wonderful question. Proximity, authentic concern and care for them, deep curiosity about their life experience, and then waiting to see when and if such an opportunity presents itself. I have a real humility about how we witness to the love of Christ for other people. And I'm persuaded that if people, I've been studying a fair amount. I'm in my late 60s now, so I've been curious about getting old, you know? It's happening. And one of the things I've been mindful of are the people in my life that I would consider elders, or other people who are the kind of people that younger people just like hanging around, right? They gravitate to them like moths to light. And what it is about those people that make them so attractive. And the more I study them and study the characteristics, it's like, because they're so curious and interested in you, right? That you come away from being with them feeling more prized and cherished and loved. You know, and I have several people in my life who do that for our adult children. And every time my sons are in their presence, they blossom like flowers, right? Jesus' name is never mentioned. But his love for them is just like this. And so I would say that's where I begin. I'm sure there are other ways, but that's where I begin. And I think that's, no matter what happens, they may not darken the door of our churches, but they will have come to know something of the love of God through your love for them. Beautiful question. Thank you.
Bishop Budde, I'm not really sure why, but this is heavy on my heart to just ask you to speak a little on forgiveness. And I know you spoke on mercy earlier. Maybe something that you are known about forgiveness for a long time.
Thank you. It's a powerful question. I would say that not to be funny, this is not a joke, but C.S. Lewis was once asked that question. And I remember C.S. Lewis was British. He was probably asked that question in the late 1940s, early 1950s, post-war. And he said, when working on forgiveness, it's best not to start with the Gestapo. And it is funny unless the Gestapo is part of your living memory, right? And so I would say what he's saying is he's acknowledging that the deeper the wound, the harder the path of forgiveness, and not to imagine that that's not so. Now, I think it is helpful to practice forgiveness in the small things so that we are more conditioned to be forgiving people, right? So I have so one of the big perks of being a bishop is that there are like reserved parking spots for bishops. One of the best parts of the job. And I was driving with my uncle and aunt. They were in the back seat of the car, and I was driving into like where there was a reserved parking spot, and someone was in that parking spot, right? And I just turned and I parked somewhere else. And my uncle said to my aunt later on, "Boy, she's such an amazing Christian." And I thought, the bar's pretty low, but imagine how much energy would have been wasted in my life if I got mad every time somebody parked in my parking spot, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so to be practicing forgiveness. And then when it really is beyond you or beyond me, kind of like what we were saying earlier about mercy, it's entrusting it to God. And I can confess, I still have difficulty forgiving my son's 9th grade football coach. My son's 34, right? But what he did to our son that year, it just, see how well I've let it go? But just to say that it is a discipline, but that is why we lean on the power of God that is greater than we are. And when it comes, I think it does come as a gift, and it does release us, So thank you for that.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
My name's Michael. I noticed on the pamphlet that we got that you majored in history, and I wanted to ask, this time right now feels so politically divided in a newly harsh way.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you look back to in the past that you find comfort in, or to inform your next steps?
Ooh, yeah, I think about that a lot. What a great question. I'm sure there are many. The one that I come back to now a lot, as you can tell from the example I gave about James Lawson, I'm a big student of the civil rights era. But recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been learning more and more about the grandparents of the people who came to prominence in the 50s and 60s. And one of the reasons why that period of the late 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, early 20s, one of the reasons why that's so powerful is that, particularly, and I live in Washington, D.C., the entire federal workforce was completely racially mixed during Reconstruction. And then it went up and down, and then Woodrow Wilson, overnight, segregated the workforce again, just like that, just segregated it. And from then on, for about 20 years then, rights that had been taken for granted were systematically removed in the Washington, D.C. area. That had already happened in some of the southern states in the early years after Reconstruction. So there was a period of work, that wasn't perfect by any means, but working towards certain rights and then just taken away. And so I read now Thurgood Marshall, Pauli Murray, Martin Luther King Sr. and his parents. How did they live through a time of such dramatic retrenchment of white supremacy after a period when there seemed to be possibilities for hope, right? And I feel like in some ways, I don't know how long this particular period is going to last, but I'm in it for the long game. I may not see it, but I've got 3 grandchildren, and they've got friends, and we've got whole people coming up behind us. And I think in some ways, that's our work now. And so for me, it's protecting as much as I can, and then keeping the seeds of hope alive and planting seeds of new possibility for what's coming up, maybe long after I'm gone. So thank you for that. Great question. Man.
I think we have time for one more question. One more question? Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Patty Williams.
Hi, Patty.
And my question centers on personal relationships.
Yes.
I live in a residential community, and I have family members who are in ways much different. And if we get in conversation, we've talked a lot about this. Do we listen and explore? Do we listen and then present our point of view? I mean, to me, that's the heart of how to deal with family as well as ongoing relationships with people that I go to dinner with and lunch with. And so I just...
Thank you for that question. What a wonderful way to end. And it is hard. When I was trying to come to terms with some of the really challenging dynamics in my family of origin, I had a teacher who said that a goal to aspire to is to have the best possible relationship you can with everyone in your family or your community, recognizing that the best possible is very different depending on what's coming toward you, right? That you can be, like, I had a much different relationship with my mother than I did with my father because of what my mother was able to give me in return than my father just didn't have the capacity for. But I still, you know, my mentor was telling me, don't give up on your father, just seek the best possible relationship. Recognizing that at his age, he's not going to change. The likelihood of him changing is very slim. And so your task is to have the best possible relationship with him as you can. But that also saved me or spared me from trying to make it better on my own, right? I thought, what do I want to be as a loving daughter? Like, how could I, so it was more on me now, like, how can I show up here? Now, in the very particular things, like I have family members that it's probably best that we don't discuss politics. They know where I stand. But so if they can know that about me and profoundly disagree with me and know that I still care like crazy about their kids and want to have what is it Brian Stevenson says? Everyone is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And I think everyone is also more than the stupidest opinions we've ever had, right? Right? We're all more than that. And if we can discover the more, now again, I'm not condoning abuse. I'm not condoning, just there are certain things that, hey, best not say that around me. Like you can say that around other people, but for me, that's where it stops. You can find all different ways to put your boundaries around it, but I would say to persevere. Persevere, and God love you for the effort, right? Thank you.
Let's say thank you.
All. Oh, great, it was so good. Oh. Thank you.
Before you go, let me say three things in chronological order. First, tomorrow at 10 o'clock here in this space, Bishop Budde will offer a second lecture on the same theme. I hope you'll come and join us, and if you're somewhere else, it will be on our YouTube channel so you can live stream it or watch it later. That's first. Second, Lowell Taylor. Lowell, would you wave a big wave? Lowell Taylor was in Washington, D.C. recently, and he experienced a prayer guard. And he is inviting people of faith to gather to pray for peace and justice, and to pray against state and community-sponsored violence. The next 3 Fridays here in Fayetteville, this coming Friday will be at St. James Missionary Baptist Church. The one after will be at Genesis, and the Friday after that will be here at St. Paul's, 6 p.m. for the next 3 Fridays. Join us to pray for those things. And the last thing I want to remind you about is on the back of your handout, you'll see that Donald Whitehead, the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless, will be with us in October, another Tippy lecture, and I hope you'll be here for that. Thank you again so much.
If there's anyone whose book I didn't sign, if you'd like me to sign, I'd be happy to do that before you go.
Thank you. Book signing at the table in the back. Let's go to the, yep.